Welcome to the guide, Exile. In this guide we will be discussing the Shaper endgame boss and strategies for defeating him. The Shaper was once a man of studies and a father to a small girl. He worked in an academy in Oriath as a researcher under tight scrutiny of the ruling High Templar Venarius. The High Templar was a man of strict thought, destroyed anything that he deemed heretical, and disposed of anybody who disagreed with him. One day he paid a visit to the Shaper with a special chest, a chest that contained a complex gold device. The Shaper poured days and nights into this device to figure out its purpose and function. This machine is now what we know as a map device. At night he would have vivid dreams near the device, ones that appeared so real that they were indistinguishable from waking thought and motion. Soon he would be able to control his actions and locations within these dreams more precisely. The line between dreams and the real world began to blur as the Shaper started to notice items that he'd lost or damaged in the dreams remained true in the real world. The High Templar grew more suspicious of the Shaper and his doings with the device and demanded to know of his actions with it, to which the Shaper held back his findings. With this, the High Templar had his guard take the Shaper's daughter and threatened his life for exchange of the Shaper's knowledge of the device. As they moved to the Shaper's lab, where the device resided, the Shaper knew he had to do something drastic to save himself and his daughter. As they neared the device, the Shaper watched as the High Templar and his guard slipped into dream. It was at this moment the Shaper grabbed his daughter's hand, took the device, and slammed it into the ground, destroying it and opening a portal between worlds. As the Templar slipped into the portal, he grabbed a hold of the Shaper's shoulder, pulling him into the dream. The Shaper was forced to let go of his daughter's hand, leaving her back in Oriath as he moved into the void that would soon become his new home, his realm to shape into perfection for his daughter, Zana. Zana, now without a mother or a father, grew up an orphan. She was infatuated with the research and writings of her father, to which she kept secret. Unfortunately, these writings would only fall on deaf ears within Oriath, so she moved to Ray class before she would be exiled for her thoughts. Once there, she discovered the use of maps and the map device, where she would spend her time researching. In this time, she also came to the conclusion that these maps were interconnected, a path to a certain discovery, as something was twisting and distorting these maps. Their connections were charted on the Atlas of Worlds. After maps and maps of destruction and searching, the source of the corruption had been found to be the Shaper, located at the center of the Atlas, who must be stopped. The corruption of the void and the necessity for perfection has deluded his mind, now not even recognizing or accepting his own daughter. The Shaper is currently one of the most difficult boss fights in the game. It requires knowledge of all of his moves and precision to avoid them, as one mistake can lead to an instant death. Since there are so many different build types, it is hard to say exactly what defenses and offenses you will need to complete this encounter, but I will make a few base recommendations here. For your player stats, defensively, you will want to have above 7,000 life or 9,000 energy shield. These numbers are not set in stone and can vary depending on your other defenses and or offenses. You will also want a fast movement skill to avoid any of the moves that the Shaper makes. Additional elemental mitigation is vital to mitigate any of the elemental damage that the Shaper deals. You will also want sustainable defenses. Strong leech or regeneration are highly recommended as damage can occur in quick succession. For offenses, you will want very strong single target damage. It is hard to make an encompassing guess for all builds since each build has different delivery types of damage. However, the Shaper has around 2 times as much life as the Guardians have, which is over 16 times as much life as tier 15 bosses. So if you'd like to test your damage, I would recommend testing it against the Guardians to see your time to kill and if it is within comfortable range of your defenses and offenses. Of course, these recommendations are just guidelines and can vary depending on each character. Some defensive recommendations. Since the Shaper deals large amounts of elemental damage, mainly in the forms of cold, as well as some physical damage, it is recommended that you take mitigations for these types of damage. For core mitigations, we will be looking for Fortify. This is always recommended for its 20% reduction to all damage sources. Endurance charges are useful if they are part of your core build, or if you gain large amounts of regen from them. For the most part, we will be dodging the majority of heavy-hitting physical attacks, so you do not need to worry about making an effort to fit these into your build. Making use of block, dodge, and or evasion can also be very useful for avoiding many of his attacks that can one-shot you. For auras, Purity of Ice is a very good option. This aura grants plus maximum to cold resistance. This aura can be used if you can fit it into your build without losing major amounts of damage, and are having difficulties dodging all of the Shaper's moves, giving you some more leeway. For flasks, the following bases are recommended: a Basalt Flask and a Sapphire Flask. A Taste of Hate is also a good all-around option for this. A Basalt Flask will be plenty to mitigate any of the physical hits that you may take during this fight. A Sapphire Flask will help mitigate all of the cold damage the Shaper and mini-bosses you will have to face deal. For Flask affixes, the following are recommended. Of Heat. This flask will help ensure that you are not chilled or frozen from all of the cold damage that is dealt during the fight. Like the other endgame Guardians, the Shaper has the following defenses. This means builds that heavily utilize curses will only have a 20% curse effectiveness, and builds who make general use of status ailments such as Bleed, Ignite, and Poison will be at a 50% damage loss. Since the Guardians have these same defenses, aside from various immunities, you will be able to judge your damage and time to kill through their encounters before facing the Shaper, as mentioned before. All damage values that are represented for any enemy moves in this guide will be shown as if the player has 75% elemental resistances and 0 physical mitigation. All attacks made can also perform critical strikes, meaning that they do 2.3 times more damage, making them very deadly. Side note, beware of any deadly prophecies you have, such as Tempests, as these can trigger inside this map and make the fight very difficult for little to no return. Make sure to seal or trigger these before attempting your Shaper run. The Shaper's realm is accessed via the 4 key fragments that are gained via the Guardians of the Void. These keys must be placed into a map device in the proper order to be activated. When you first enter this realm, you will arrive at the Nexus. As you will notice, all of the ground within the Shaper's realm has been shattered and pulled from various locations, creating an amalgamation of zones surrounded by a void of stars. Before you can face the Shaper, you must defeat 4 mini-bosses. These mini-bosses are located at the ends of each of the wings of the Nexus, with each wing having decorations and landscapes of those respective bosses. The mini-bosses are 4 randomly chosen map bosses that have no special mods to them, aside from their normal movesets. For the most part, these bosses are simple and easy to kill before they can do much more than a couple moves. You will want to try and make use of your flasks only if necessary on these bosses, as you will require your flasks for the Shaper fight, and cannot refill the flasks from other monsters before his encounter. Certain mini-bosses will spawn adds, to which you can make more liberal use of your flasks as they will refill. There are only a couple mini-bosses to be cautious of. These are Duresso, Malachi, and Rigwald. These encounters are a bit tougher since they are phased, and you cannot simply kill them instantly, as well as having some deadly moves. Make sure to understand the mechanics of these bosses before attempting the Shaper map set. Now that you have defeated these 4 mini-bosses, you can return to the center of the Nexus to enter the portal to encounter the Shaper. Once you pass through the portal, you will be placed in the main arena in which you will battle the Shaper. Before moving and starting the fight, you can place totems, traps, or charge up your skills. Once you step forward, Zana will engage in a dialogue with the Shaper. This will last a short time, and then he will become attackable. The fight is on now, Exiles. The Shaper is a 3-phase encounter. For the first phase, you must bring him down to 50% of his health pool. During this phase, the Shaper will perform the following moves. A melee attack. A melee attack that deals 3,500 physical damage on average, and will only occur if you are within melee range of the Shaper. Recommendation: this move only occurs if you are in melee range, and does not deal deadly damage if your defenses are up. It is a good opportunity to flask through and get damage in on him. Beam. The Shaper charges up and fires a large beam at its target's original location. This beam deals a total of 8,000 elemental damage per second, that is, cold, fire, and lightning elements, and lasts for 3 seconds. Recommendation: move around to the backside of the Shaper and get in as much damage as possible during this attack. This is the best move to deal damage to the Shaper. Projectiles. The Shaper will throw 3 ball projectiles in quick succession in a straight line. These projectiles penetrate 25% cold resistance, dealing 6,500 cold damage on average. Recommendation: move to the left or right to dodge these projectiles, as they are fairly slow moving. If you are within melee range, try and move to his backside. Teleport Slam. The Shaper morphs into another dimension and quickly reappears at his target's location, bringing down a large hammer slamming the ground in a large AoE. This attack deals deadly physical damage unless evaded or blocked. Recommendation: since the Shaper will lock onto your location during his teleport, and not your original location at the beginning of his teleport animation, you will want to wait for the Shaper to start reappearing from the teleport. Once he does, quickly dodge away using a movement skill or Quicksilver Flask to avoid the slam AoE. It is a good idea to try and move to a location where you want him to be while he is performing the teleport, since this is one of the only ways he moves around the arena. Open Portal. The Shaper will quickly teleport to the upper left or right portions of the arena and begin spawning monsters from various locations for 25 seconds. During this time, the Shaper is invulnerable, while Zana is left vulnerable, as she tries to close the portal. You must kill the monsters before they kill Zana. If the monsters kill Zana, she will retreat to the bottom of the arena and be unable to assist you for a short period of time. Recommendation: try to set up such that you can kill all of the monsters in quick succession as they exit the portal. These monsters do have a large amount of health, so don't be worried if you feel like they're very tanky. Using a Vol Lightning Trap can be very useful for shocking and killing these monsters faster. Vortex Balls. During the course of the fight, blue Vortex Balls will spawn at the edges of the arena. These balls will track you and engage you if you come close enough to them. They will then follow you around at a constant pace until they touch you, at which point they will fold out into a vortex that deals an initial hit of about 1000 cold damage. The vortex will then chill and deal 3800 cold damage per second. These vortexes will remain in the location where they are dropped for the remainder of the phase. Note, these can only deal one instance of damage, so if they are stacked, only one vortex cold damage over time effect will occur. Recommendation: if you have an engaged vortex, move it and touch it at the outside edges of the arena and away from the center, portal, and current Shaper locations. If you are skilled enough, you can gather multiple vortex balls over time and place them in a single location at once, reducing the downtime of engaging the Shaper. Strategy: this phase is the simplest of the three. You will want to try and get in as much damage as possible on the Shaper right as the phase begins, popping all of your offensive flasks. If you are in melee range, the Shaper will generally attack you with his melee attack or charge up for a beam. If he does charge up for a beam, make sure to quickly move around to his back. This is the best move to deal free damage on him. Be aware that the beam does have a large AoE and can hit you if you are on either his left or right side in melee range. Depending on your range from the Shaper, he will also perform his ball projectile and teleport slam attacks. Again, for his teleport slam, try to move to a location where you want the Shaper to teleport to, and then quickly dodge out of the way once he appears at that zone. During this time, vortex balls will also be spawning into the arena. Make sure to drop them on the edges of the arena or down in the bottom of the arena. This is so that they are not conflicting with the center and top locations for Zana and the portals. If the Shaper does open a portal, make sure to kill the exiting monsters as fast as possible. If Zana does die in this phase, it is not an issue, but will be in the later phases. Once you have brought the Shaper to his life threshold for the first phase, he will now teleport to the center of the room, becoming invulnerable, and then banishing you and Zana to another location within the void. Banishment One. In this banishment, there is a generic themed tile set path that contains many monsters and leads in a mostly linear manner to the top of the zone. These monsters provide XP, flask charges, and Vol skill charges, but do not drop any items. You will want to travel through this zone as quick as possible, as the Shaper recovers life during this banishment phase. You do not have to kill all of the monsters in this zone, so only kill those in your path that are a threat. You can also make use of movement skills that can cross gaps to maneuver through the zone more quickly. At the end of the zone, there is a mini-boss you must defeat before you can encounter the Shaper again. This mini-boss is known as the Uncreated. The Uncreated will perform the following moves: a melee attack, a basic melee attack which deals around 3500 physical damage on average. Spectral Throw, a basic spectral throw attack which deals around 2000 physical damage on average. Frostbolt, cast a Frostbolt that deals around 2000 cold damage on average. Vortex, the Uncreated transforms a casted Frostbolt into a vortex that deals around 1000 cold damage on initial hit and 1200 cold damage per second within its degeneration zone, lasting for 3 seconds. Recommendation: move away from the casted Frostbolts to avoid being hit by these Frostbolts and vortexes. If one is formed, make sure to move out of it. Ground Slam Vortex. The Uncreated will wind up, bringing his weapons over his head and slamming them down to the ground, creating a large vortex that deals an initial hit of 6000 cold damage on average and around 1800 cold damage per second within its degeneration zone, lasting 4 seconds. Recommendation: once you see the Uncreated wind up, move to his backside to avoid the slam and continue damage on him. This boss fight is relatively simple, but can be a big hassle for melee range players. You will have to move around the boss frequently, ensuring to dodge his Frostbolts and overhead slam. Make sure to keep your Fortify and Sapphire flasks up for this fight, as you do not want to lose portals to this map mini-boss. After you have defeated him, a portal will open to the next phase of the Shaper encounter. Before you enter this portal, ensure that you have all of your flasks and Vol skills charged. If not, quickly kill some monsters and move through the portal. tip. Try to leave a few monster packs alive near the mini-boss location for Flask charges after the fight. Phase 2. As with the first phase, right when you enter the second phase, you will be able to place totems, traps, and charge skills up before moving forward to engage the Shaper. Again, he and Zana will engage in a short dialogue before he becomes attackable. For this phase, you must bring the Shaper down to 25% of his life pool. Now in this second phase, the Shaper will have a new move that he performs. This move is Bullet Hell. The Shaper will teleport to the top of the arena and become invulnerable. Zana, if alive after an open portal move has occurred, will move to the center of the room, creating a red bubble shield. The Shaper will begin to teleport around the arena 16 times, casting 11 small purple cold damage projectiles in a nova around him at each teleport. These balls penetrate 25% cold resistance, dealing 6,500 cold damage on average. Recommendation: you will always want to ensure that you are within the bubble for this attack. Make sure to avoid dropping vortexes in this area during the fight, and if a vortex ball is active and engaged on you in the beginning of this move, make sure to quickly activate it outside of the bubble before he begins teleporting. In general, at the end of the move, the Shaper will immediately cast a beam right over the center of the arena, so make sure to be ready to move right when he stops. Now the vortex balls will begin to spawn more frequently than they did in the first phase, so make sure to be ready to place those. Strategy: you will want to make sure to not immediately pop your Flasks and Vol skills as soon as the phase begins, as the Shaper will generally go right into a Bullet Hell move. After he performs this move, or if he initially does a different move, you will want to treat this much like the first phase in terms of mechanics, making sure to use your offensive Flasks and Vol skills during his beam and melee attacks. The only difference is that you will want to ensure that Zana never dies during the open portal move and that you do not place vortexes in the center of the room. If Zana does die, she will be on a cooldown for a short period of time where she cannot assist you with the Bullet Hell move, and you will be on your own to try and dodge these projectiles, which is near impossible. Once you manage to avoid all of the Shaper's moves and bring him down to 25% of his life pool, you will again be banished into another zone within the void. Banishment 2. In this second banishment, there is again a generic themed tile set path that contains many monsters and leads in a mostly linear manner to the top of the zone. As with the first banishment, you will want to travel through this zone as quick as possible, as the Shaper recovers life during this banishment phase. At the end of the zone, the Uncreated mini-boss awaits you again, but with a new name and move. This boss is known as the Unshaped, and he performs the same moveset as the Uncreated, with one new move: Frostbolt Nova. The Unshaped casts 6 Frostbolts in a half circle on either side of him. These deal 2,000 cold damage on average. Recommendation: this move is very hard to distinguish from the normal Frostbolt cast when it is first casted, but if you are able to see the move occur, make sure to move out and around the spreading Frostbolts. Numerous projectiles can hit you at the same time, making them very deadly if you are within melee range. You will either have to tank through them or move around frequently during the encounter to avoid these projectiles. Melee characters will have to play at a safe range. Like with the first Unshaped encounter, you will want to make sure to keep your defensive and offensive Flasks up and try to get in his damage as quickly as possible, avoiding Frostbolts and overhead slams. If you are melee, it is worth waiting for the Unshaped to cast a Frostbolt Nova before engaging it, so that you're not killed as soon as you move in to deal damage. This mini-boss can be a real hassle for many builds and requires very precise movement or massive damage to kill it before it performs any deadly moves. Once he has been defeated, a portal will open up to the third and final phase of the Shaper encounter. Remember to refill your Flasks and Vol skills before entering the portal. Phase 3. As with the other phases, you will be able to stand in place and place totems, traps, and charge skills up once you enter the arena. Once you move forward, Zana and the Shaper will engage in one final dialogue before he becomes attackable. As with Phase 2, the Shaper will gain one new move with Phase 3. The Shaper Clone. The Shaper will now have a clone that he can spawn that cannot be damaged and will move around the arena separate from the Shaper. He will perform the following moves: a melee attack, the Shaper Beam, and the Shaper Projectiles. These moves deal the same damage and have the same mechanics as the Shaper's original attacks. The clone will despawn while the Shaper is performing an open portal or Bullet Hell moves, but will be spawned after those moves end. Again, he cannot be damaged or killed, so he must be avoided. Recommendation: there is not much you can do about this clone other than avoid his attacks and avoid attacking him by mistake. As before, Vortex Balls will now spawn more frequently than they did in the second phase, Strategy. As with the second phase, you will want to save your offensive flasks and vol skills, as the Shaper will generally go right into a bullet hell move. After this move has been complete, or if he immediately went into another attack, you will want to pop all of your flasks and vol skills and begin damaging him as much as possible. This phase will be very hectic, as you will have to be dodging moves from not only the Shaper, but his clone, while dropping vortexes in proper locations all at the same time. This phase requires you to be very aware of the attacks that the Shaper is performing, as well as having very good damage to ensure the phase lasts as short as time as possible. Ensure to make good use of your defensive flasks and movement skills to avoid and position the Shaper for best damage opportunities. Again, when the Shaper opens a portal, ensure that Zana does not die, so that she will be able to support you during the bullet hell moves. This third phase is generally where most builds and players fail, as you need to have very good damage and defenses, as well as positioning to not become overwhelmed by all of the chaos that is occurring. It is a very tough encounter, but once you finally down the Shaper, you will have the chance of receiving some very powerful rewards. Notable drops from the Shaper include the following. The most rare and valuable of these drops is the Dying Sun, due to its strong buff to projectile skills and area of effect. The second most rare drop is the Starforge, which is a very strong two-handed physical sword. The Shaper's Touch Gloves and Voidwalker Boot uniques have similar drop rates and are the most common drops from the Shaper, generally having low value. Well, you have done it, Exile. You have defeated one of the toughest bosses in the game. The Shaper has been stopped, and Rayclast has been protected from its impending corruption. Remember that this is a very difficult fight, and not every build will be successful at completing it. If you are having difficulties with a portion of the fight, make sure to take a step back and consider your build's faults and improve them before trying to immediately do the fight again. With the correct setups and practice, you will be able to defeat this boss without a hitch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, Exile.